Um, I'm going to skip over specific acknowledgments because it takes time, and I'm trying to keep us on track. Please know we are deeply grateful, and you will each be mentioned. Having said that, I want to turn to the first panel and introduce the idea because, regrettably, I have to inform you, Laurent Cartier is in the hospital, and so he could not be with us. As I understand it, this is something that he will recover. The prognosis is excellent, but he could not fly or be with us virtually. And so we wish him absolutely the best. He may be listening, I don't know. If so, Laurent, our thoughts are with you. David Block is coming in virtually because he was unable to get a flight out of Israel. So we welcome him virtually. Can you put that other slide back because I'm using it, and then go to David? Sorry. Not the most gracious way to do it. Brad Brooks Rubin, so thrilled to have Brad with us. He brings such incredible perspective to every discussion, and the fact is that a person is not their title. The title becomes who they are. And so Brad is something for us to live up to. Jennifer Morricone from iTraceIt, someone that I've been blessed to get to know this year, very inspiring. Kat Weymouth from SCS, a transformative person whom I'm grateful to know. Sarah Yude, who is now the CEO and General Counsel of JVC. And besides my personal regard for Sarah, I want to say that IAC has always worked closely with JVC. We have the highest regard for them. They are one of the most important organizations in this ecosphere. And the moderator is Rob Bates, and Rob is the news director of JCK, and I have the utmost respect for Rob as a journalist. So with that, I give you trust, traceability, transparency.
All right, we got David. How you doing? All right? Good? Can you hear us? Oh, good.
You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. All right, so
Good to see you.
The first panel here is trust, traceability, and transparency, and we're with a group who have been working to bring transparency to this, I guess people would call it an opaque industry sometimes, occasionally. So I guess I'm going to start a little bit with just kind of a general question, which is, why is traceability, why is it important? Because it's something that we've been talking a lot about for the last couple of years or so, and just kind of like give a quick review why it's important in the regulatory framework, in the current consumer framework. And I guess I'll start with Sarah, if you don't mind. Is it okay?
That's fine. I'll give you a really short answer. I think that the way that the law applies in the United States, when you make statements, when you're talking about products, you have to be truthful about it. And that's not just in general. Like the Federal Trade Commission says that advertising has to be truthful. When you import goods at customs, you need to be truthful on your customs forms. And that means when you're claiming that a product is from a certain place, you can't lie about it. And if you don't know where that's from, that's problematic. So my very short answer is because that's the law and we should all follow it.
Okay, and I guess we'll go to Kat. Do you want to, anything you want to add to that, or no?
Well, I think as this relates to sustainability, from my point of view, it's very important that it's a key component of the sustainability features. So as Sarah's mentioning claims and legal ramifications, you need to be able to say where your products come from, where your materials come from, where they were produced. It matters in those aspects of the emissions of those pieces and the impacts of those items.
Okay, Jennifer?
I would say that somehow I would love that it would not be important to have it. But as trade has become so obscure and there are so many links, it becomes the only way to connect and to let, let's say, the whole chain understand what's the impact of what they do. And this is the way to showcase it. So that's why it becomes important. But somehow if trade was 3 links, people would have a relation and we would not need it. But as it's not that anymore, then traceability becomes important.
And finally, Brad.
It's hard to add to those good comments. I guess I would just say introduce 2 other concepts. I mean, I think transparency is important for honesty. I think the industry, whether it's vis-a-vis regulators, vis-a-vis consumers, vis-a-vis stakeholders, or just between one company and another, transparency, which isn't the same as traceability, but transparency and being open between parties is essential, and especially in an industry which always likes to talk about how much it relies on trust and honesty and the relationships between each other. And if transparency is not a part of that, then honesty comes into question. To me, traceability is important for the thing that I've talked a lot about for the last several years, which is decision making. We've created a world that's very focused on audit-based, process-focused due diligence, which is important, but shifts attention away from decision making. How does your company decide whether or not to buy something from the person ahead of you in the supply chain or sell to the person behind you in the supply chain? That's decision making. You can only make those decisions if you have real information, and when you don't have real information because traceability is lacking, you're making an imperfect set of calculations. There are, of course, other legal reasons and everything else, but to me, unless we as an industry and frankly a broader world focus on decision making, we're kind of missing the potential achievements.
And actually, I should, David, do you want to, anything you want to add to that, or no?
No, I want to add great points. The only thing I'll add is maybe just that traceability is not the goal. It's just a means to an end. It's an enabler to do everything that everyone put on the table here. And therefore, we always need to remember that just an enabler able to achieve these objectives that the panelists spoke about.
Okay, so let's talk about, there's been a number of topics. I think people talk about more of the regulatory side, but I want to talk, I guess I'll start first with the consumer side. There's been a lot of talk about whether consumers care where their diamonds are from. And, you know, De Beers just announced this big brand that's going to be from Botswana, and, you know, they're going to be talking a lot more about origins. The name of the brand is literally origins, so they obviously feel that where the diamond is from is important. So, you know, for 25 years, really, origin has been an issue in the jewelry industry. And there's been, I would say, mixed ideas of whether consumers actually care. Some people say they do, some people say they don't. I would like to get the sense, and you know, anybody can talk, what's your sense of how consumers feel about this? Anyone?
I would make a precision, so
Yeah,
origin
yeah,
is one thing, to understand where your product comes from, but the origin is not only the important factor, it's the whole procedure afterwards as well. It's all the links, it's to understand if it's flown 5 times around the world or not, if it's been manufactured in a manufacturing plant that has an impact that is positive or negative. So for me, when we take it into the traceability point of view, it's tracing where it comes from, if it's the same product that is moving along the value chain, but also the impact it has at each step And today we can showcase beautiful things that are made by some manufacturers or some mines or some traders that actually do the effort to do things right, and they become invisible at the end of the chain. And today I don't think consumers are, some are very sensitive and will take it and buy something because it does good, but I think today it's more a comparison when you have two equal products, the two stories, the two impacts, that can make a difference. And I have my kid here today, so I think that sometimes you have to think about what am I buying? And when I buy, I vote. I vote for the future that I want tomorrow. So if I don't know what's been happening along the process of my product, and even at the jeweler, at the end of the value chain, if it's a big brand that does also good things, has a foundation that does valuable projects, I prefer they change the whole strategy, but projects are already good. And then on the other side, if it's a smaller jeweler that really has made decisions based on consciousness, that is something that differentiates two products. And is, so just to come back, it's not only the origin, it's the whole chain that is important.
But do we have evidence? I agree that the chain is important, but do you think consumers care about the whole chain?
I don't...
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, because I can talk a lot, but...
I'd rather hear you talk.
But I think there are consumers that really care. There are consumers that are really conscious, that also do the effort, because it's a true effort to buy consciously. On the other hand, you have consumers like me that want to do it right, but I took a plane to come here. I mean, so I'm not coherent between my thoughts, my will, and then what my business brings me to have to do to make my business work. So this is something where I think consumers are in this bias and in this frustration between what they would like to do and what they're able to do. Now in luxury, this is the big difference between other products. And luxury is not a product that can harm my, let's say, biological state. Like buying organic is something that impacts your health. Buying luxury that is conscious or not conscious or ethical or not ethical is a total other mentality. And I think we should have some shoppers marketers on this panel to answer these kind of questions, because this is where we are lacking maybe the real market study to understand what the psychology of a consumer between what they want to do and what they do and why they do it.
Anything else, Brad? Or?
I mean, maybe just a couple of points. I think asking what consumers want is as elusive as saying, like, what do Americans want, right? Essentially, and obviously there are more consumers in the world of luxury and jewelry than Americans, but polling and what do Americans want, like, anytime someone tells you this is what Americans want, you'll get 100 different answers about, well, not this kind of American, not the American who lives there, not... When I was first in government and we were asking this question in 2010, we had an array of industry leaders, diamond industry in particular, who all said consumers don't care. If that was true, then we wouldn't still be having this conversation. We wouldn't still be evolving in this way. Not all consumers care, not all consumers, to Jen's point, like, not all consumers care about the same thing, but consumers all care about something. And to the extent that there is a group of consumers who care about it matters. I think there's a couple of quick, I mean, David's point is the right one, which is it's just information. It's just a means to achieve an end. And Joanne Lebert of Impact wrote a really good piece about traceability, asking the real question of who is it for? And if you ask who is it for, and the OECD has done its own sort of 8-step recommendation about what traceability should be, which starts with, what are you trying to achieve? Who is it for? What's the objective? Traceability that delivers something to a consumer is potentially different than traceability that delivers something between companies in a supply chain, or for artisanal miners, or for refiners. So I think in order to make these conversations useful, we actually should break them down a bit more and get into the nuances of, if we only are talking about consumer-based traceability and presentation and marketing, that's one thing. But traceability and transparency mean a lot more, to me anyway, than that.
One thing we do know about the way consumers behave is actually from some of the studies that were done for the Federal Trade Commission Green Guides revision in 2012. And that is that consumers ascribe a lot of meaning to the advertising claims we make in general. And so I think for a long time, the jewelry industry did not emphasize origin of its products because it thought that consumers did not care. And now that we are telling those stories more, consumers are paying attention. They, you know, from the studies about the green guides, we saw that environmental claims that are made, they think they're really important when you make them. And so if you make environmental claims that maybe aren't so valuable, consumers think like, oh, this is a green product, I'm gonna go buy it. But if it's not actually environmentally beneficial, that's a problem. And so I think we can take some of that information and that knowledge about consumer behavior, even though it is from 2012, it's still valuable to say, okay, if we talk to consumers about the origin of products, they might learn to ask those questions for other products that they're considering. I think we have a responsibility to lead them and to teach them about our own supply chain and how products get to market.
And I can add on to that, for SES, like we are in a variety of different industries, and so we see the consumer impact in take FSC, or take fisheries, or organic products, right? And the consumer understands what those things mean because we've taught them, to Sarah's point, we've taught them what that means over the years. And so as the industry evolves and we have more of those conversations and the consumer understands that there is a choice and they're allowed to make that choice, they don't have to assume that their product has that traceability and that responsible supply chain behind it. They can be shown and told that that has that behind it. I often think that the consumer doesn't know that they have a choice sometimes in knowing all of that information.
Yeah, and I would just...
Rob, I can...
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I talk to a lot of retailers around the world, and I ask them these similar questions. So one of the questions I like to ask them, do consumers ask about the origin or traceability of diamonds? And generally the answer is no, they don't ask. So that, I think consumers are not walking into the store and asking where their diamonds are from. So then I ask, then why are you doing it? And again, it differs from retailer to retailer. But if you start at the high end of the market, the high-end brands, they will tell you very clearly, because our consumers expect us to know. Whether they tell us or not is tactics of the retailer, what the information they want to provide to the end consumer. But they say their consumer expects it from them, that they understand their supply chain, that they're working with the responsible supply chain. So it's not a matter of what the consumer is actually walking to the store and asking, but what they're expecting from the brand that they're buying from.
Right, and I would agree with all the comments here, and I would say my experience is that, yes, I think a lot of consumers don't care. That's a fact. But some consumers do. You know, it's not, as Brad was saying, it's not a monolith. Consumers are not a monolith. And if you look at the younger, more educated consumers who are often wealthier, they're more likely to care. So, I was just talking to somebody who was based out of Seattle, and she said consumers absolutely care, and she sells Canadian diamonds, and they do very well for her. You talk to a lot of other stores, they'll say people don't care. So it's the idea of, you know, do we want to lose a particular part of the business? And you look at what every lab-grown company always puts conflict-free and eco-friendly because they believe that consumers care. And I don't think they're wasting money, and I don't think they're stupid. I think they just do that because they know it's a selling point, right? Whether, you know, I'm not talking about the legitimacy of it, I'm just saying that this is what they do because they find it important. So on that note, let's talk about the regulatory environment, because right now we have sanctions against Russian diamonds, as we all know, over half carat coming into the United States. What is there, you know, with the new administration, people aren't sure if there's if this is going to continue, if we're going to have any momentum on this. It looked like the sanctions were tightening. Now they're kind of left where they are. It's not clear about, how clearly they're going to be enforced, since obviously customs has a lot of, has enormous amount of fish to fry. Any sense of where that's going and what, people should be, how people should be thinking about the sanctions right now, the Russian diamond sanctions in particular? Sarah, you wanna?
Yeah, sure.
Don't look at
okay.
me.
So it is still banned. So you cannot import Russian diamonds, half a carat or higher, Russian origin diamonds. Doesn't matter where they were cut and polished. You can't bring those into the US. You have to, when you are importing diamonds, file a self-declaration statement stating that they are not of Russian origin. That statement does need to be backed up with some evidence. You do not yet need to submit that evidence to customs, but they may come asking for it. They may hold up your shipment and ask you for that information. So one of the ways that traceability systems can be useful is to provide that backup information to show, okay, these diamonds came from somewhere else. I have a whole, little blockchain that I can show you to prove where they come from. We know that the EU is still moving towards a more formalized traceability system for January 1. Whether the US is going to participate in that, I think, is a giant question mark. Unfortunately, at the level that these decisions are made, the folks that have been appointed into these roles still have not yet been confirmed by the Senate. And so there's a bit of a holding pattern at the moment at state in terms of what they're going to do. And I think, honestly, if we're thinking a little bit wider geopolitically, you see that the U.S. policy to Russia keeps shifting, right? We think that it's pro-Russia, and then all of a sudden, they say, oh, just kidding, we're going to send a bunch of weapons to Ukraine. And then you think, okay, maybe it's not pro-Russia. Unclear. So I think that we're in a bit of a holding pattern. However, I don't think we're going to go backwards in terms of those Russian diamond sanctions. It's really, really, one thing I've learned from Brad over the years is that it's really, really difficult to unwind a sanctions program. And he's done it, but it takes years, not months, to undo that kind of work. And so I think we're going to be here for a while. That's my best guess.
Brad, do you have anything
On the European side,
Yeah, go ahead.
the last news we had was that in September, the announcement that there will be three, let's say, scenarios. Some private traceability systems, it will have to be digital for the 1st of January. And for some brands that have their own system, they will be able to have it. It will be audited each year. For those who have a third party, it will be the third party solution that will be audited by a specific auditing company that is entitled by the European Union. And then the discussion is about small companies that are maybe not up to date. Now the European Union will say, you've known it for long, if you have to die out, you have to die out. Now the AWTC is fighting a lot to be able to give them some sort of a bit more elasticity. And they say if they need more, now they've had 2 years to become ready. What should they do? So there's also a pricing situation because the diamonds is really down. The companies are really having a hard time for other reasons as well. So this is where the discussions is trying to push during the summer, and in September we will know a bit more about that. This said, there are the sanctions, but there's also, as you said, it takes time to unwind. And it's not only when the legal regulatory, let's say national, international regulatory bodies change and that some sources get allowed into the regions, the brands keep it also their way. Let's say, if we take the example of Angola, that is really working so hard on getting everything in order, also ESG-wise, they're really doing an effort to understand how to comply, how to do things better, how to also improve the country's return on investment, let's say, for their population. They're not accepted by all brands yet. And though they're doing a lot of effort. So, and there are a lot of other countries like that as well, even for gemstones, not only diamonds. So it means that we have to take it from 2 points of view. One thing is the regulatory. One thing is what the brands dare to do to not take a risk that all their marketing investments get, how do you say, harmed by what they see harmed by an NGO saying, you know, you have this in your value chain and there's this issue, so it's for them a strategic move to be able to trace and know what's happening. That's the most important thing. And some will cut supply, some will say, now we want a positive impact. And this is a shout out to brands, like you can have a positive impact by doing something. That's it.
Brad?
I would just add a couple of things. I mean, I agree with those points, and I think Sarah summarized the U.S. situation well. I think I would just add one, I mean, what we are watching, separate from the sort of where the impossibility of predicting where Russia policy is going, is the impossibility of predicting where any policy is going. And it would be silly, I think, for any company to imagine that at one point or another, someone is not going to say to a person in power in the White House, you know, we need to stop all products coming from X. That's now happening through tariffs. At some point, that might switch, and maybe there becomes a more direct import restriction, whether it's on China, whether it's on South Africa, or other places that have been in the administration's crosshairs already. So the idea that we're only putting in place these traceability systems because of the objective of Russia misses the point that to the extent that traceability is for regulators, the regulators are going to want that information. You know, God forbid a terrorist attack happens and it comes from a place where that involves diamonds. You know, our ambassador to Belgium has said on the radio that he thinks that diamonds are supporting terrorism that are going through Belgium. It's not that hard to imagine those kinds of decisions being made, and they get made very quickly, notwithstanding a lot of effort at consultation. So I think it's important to understand that, again, traceability and transparency is just information, and whether the information is requested by a consumer or by your business partner or by a regulator, having more information and better documented information is going to be important, whatever the objective is. And I think if you look at the outside of diamonds, it doesn't affect diamonds, but it does affect gold, is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. That statute, which was signed by President Biden, but basically developed during the Trump administration because the Trump administrations consistently have cared about human trafficking and have taken a lot of steps around human trafficking. You can argue about good or bad, but it's a focus. That law says that if your goods are coming from, and this is solar panels, tomatoes, some gold, other metals, cotton, if your goods and any product made with it, it's not just the product itself, it's anything made with those products, the presumption upon entry is that it's made with forced labor. So you have to prove that it's not in order to get your goods out. It's not the other way around. It's not the self-declaration that Sarah was describing. If you are an importer of solar panels from China, you are having to prove to the customs agent. And if you look at the statistics, there are several billions of dollars of products that are sitting with customs because someone couldn't make that, couldn't convince them. So to expect that that isn't going to unfold, and there is now a gold mine in China that's on that list, and gold companies are having to ask themselves that question, to expect that that won't happen to jewelry ever, I think, is missing the regulatory point.
And David, can you give us perhaps an update on what's going on with the EU and their demands for traceability for Russian diamonds? I know they've talked about this kind of ledger that would involve every diamond, and I just want to know if they're, you know, even if the United States is perhaps a little bit more erratic, I would say, or unpredictable, if they feel that that's still going to happen.
Well, so I think actually Jennifer gave quite a good overview of what's going on in the EU. And as she said, the goal or objective of the EU is 1st January to implement what they actually wanted to implement September over a year and a half ago. So that's been delayed, but January 1st is the new date. They are still in consultations with industry, with technology providers, with government. So I don't think there's yet a conclusion. There's a framework, which I prefer not to go into too much. Again, Jennifer mentioned some of the highlights, but there's a framework that they're trying to put together and to have that implemented from 1st January, regardless of what the US decides to do.
And do you think they'll make that 1st January deadline? Or?
I believe there's a better chance than the previous dates, which were, in my opinion, not reasonable. They were never possible to achieve, but I do think that there is a chance that January 1st could actually happen this time.
Okay, we want more, but you want a question or?
Thanks. This is Christina Villegas. I have a comment and then 2 questions. So my comment is with traceability, I'm for it, but just a warning that traceability can be exclusionary. Certain folks, certain producers can pay for traceability and certain folks cannot. So there's 45 million hidden producers around the world that are relevant to the jewelry industry. And those are called artisanal and small-scale miners who use shovels and picks and human strength to dig minerals out of the ground. And a quarter of all gold in the world is mined this way. And 80% of all colored gemstones are mined this way. And 20% of all diamonds. And they cannot afford fancy traceability systems. And so when we think about traceability, we have to think about who we're cutting out. And these are farmers oftentimes, and people just trying to make a living. So when we think about this, that's the responsibility of governments, local governments, to respond. But sometimes they don't have the means to respond. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about who we're serving, and to Brad's point, traceability for whom, and who we're affecting. At the same time, we have to make sure that industry is held to account. And to Jennifer's point, so consumers understand what they're buying into, right? So we have to be able to serve both constituents. And I think there's ways to do that. My question for the panel is, what are kind of, for traceability systems, to make sure they're real? So we build trust, to the panel's point, the panel is called trust, traceability, and transparency. Instead of just like fake data people can just plug into a system, what are things we should, people in this room can be looking for to make sure it's real? So we can actually know it's not just like fake numbers I can just put in my little system. What are evidence points? And what are the call outs to people who are designing these systems to we actually know it's not just someone sitting at their computer? Thanks.
Well, I think auditing.
Well, maybe I can.
Oh. I think auditing comes
Go
into
ahead,
play immensely in this point, because you have to have that trust, and third-party assurance is supposed to be providing that trust as a tool, as a part of the process. So if you're benchmarking where someone is today, which is part of the process for assurance, and how do they improve upon that? So if you are auditing someone yearly, and auditing can be on-the-ground training, it can be what are they doing within those processes that fit within their means. Obviously, it's very different in an ASM situation than it is industrial scale mining, but how do you tailor a process to where they are today and where they can move to? I think we've seen great advancements in the technology for traceability that I think is implementable at an ASM level, when they can have QR code printers and QR codes on their phones and tamper-proof packaging. That yes, there is always going to be an element of human error that can happen along those processes, but if someone is coming in and working with them on a yearly basis, you hope that the trust and the transparency improves that along the way.
David?
Yeah, I'm going to relate just to diamonds. Again, gold, gemstones, and other precious metals, I'm not too versed in. But on the diamond side of the industry, it's actually simpler because it's not such a complex ecosystem like gemstones, for example. And I think when you talk about diamonds, it can be totally inclusive, maybe not 100%, but very much including the ASM. Again, there are many different methodologies that can make it work. You don't necessarily need to go all the way back to the individual, but you can work through government and certain channels that the diamonds go through along the pipeline. So I think for diamonds, there's definitely an ability to make it an inclusive system. Again, for gemstones and other precious metals, I have less knowledge. The second thing I just want to say is that I think we also need to be careful of not doing anything because we cannot cover 100%. So we need to find the balance between creating the transparency and finding solutions that can make it as inclusive as possible, and not stop in our tracks because of the fact that we have challenges with segments like ASM. So we need to find the right balance and look for the solutions in order to resolve them.
I'd like to add two things here. I think what you said about the control, about the same product moving through the value chain. For example, the Serene machine does that very well. It's true that the cost can be prohibitive for some, and it's for the diamonds. I think systems, and there is not to pitch or to understand, but it's that systems that do the traceability has to be a train that adds on the information and then can partner up with connectors that can connect the product with auditors and NGOs that are locally based to be able to adapt that this information loaded onto the train, but this train has to be flexible, price-wise as well. It is, in my concern, hyper important that I can also include the small-scale miners, and maybe, well, what we worked on was a model that was able to be responding to big brands' demands and to small ASM, and working also on a solution. I know the World Bank is here somewhere, but a solution for real down to the individual traceability. Because there are people who don't have ID cards, who don't have any identification method, but you need to be able to identify them, geolocalize, and also make sure that this is the person that mined it. You can also have, you collaborate also with some, let's say, projections and AI that we're working on now for the gemstones, that can predict how much could have been yield with this machinery or this tool or this. If you only have a hammer or you don't even have a spattle, because this is the case of some of the ASMs that we discuss with, how can you define how much yield they probably could have? And so you traceability cannot trace 100%, especially not the illegal stuff, but we can trace the legal stuff. But we can at least say that 90, 85, 90%. And once in 5-10 years' time, technology will have advanced also. We will have also more stones on the systems, not only the mined ones, but also the ones that are already around and that have to be traced for circularity matters, especially when we were talking about consumers. And I think I mentioned it in Vicenza at the panel that Gaetano was talking about. If we can't prove that all these materials also can do good or don't do as bad, we will maybe end up as fur, saying that any luxury products as gold, gemstones, and diamonds are doing harm, and therefore we shouldn't wear them. And it will be a shame to wear jewelry pieces, as it is a bit. If you wear a wolf fur today, people will stigmatize you a bit. So this is where I think traceability can show what happens, show the good stuff and the bad stuff, but it has to include the small players. And for that, I think the cooperation and development has some role to play for the starting points. And once it actually becomes a business where you can even show the value that goes back, mobile pay exists. I come from the cocoa sector, so there we had artisanal farmers able to be traced down to the cooperative and to the individual and to which batch it would go into. And you could even trace that all the way through to a chocolate bar. Not when it came into the industrial processing, which is a bit the same case in this. But so it is feasible. It's just about thinking about it. And then it's true that when it's companies, you need to also make an income to make your company survive. But this is where cooperation and development can come in and play a role for the starting point. And then if the flow of money can go back, you can start proving actually the impact of traceability being positive. So this is how I see it. It's a bit reduced, but this is the ideology.
I mean, just to pick up on that last, I mean, I think we often have this starting point of we're going to leave people out, like they're already left out. And they've been left out. You know, if you, I mean, you, it's always good when the person asking the panel the question knows more than anybody on the panel, but you know better, and as does Ruby and Estelle and a lot of people in this room, how little information people on the artisanal mining side have about what happens in a jewelry store and what value has been developed all the way through. So it isn't that we're leaving them out, they're already left out, other than through programs like Moyo Gems and Gem Fair and others. So I think we have to shift the framework and the sort of interest in the status quo that gets put forward by a lot of big parts of the industry to sort of say we're going to leave these guys behind when they've been leaving them behind forever. I think what we have learned about traceability and like what are the indications of what works, well, it's when a program takes a long time to develop and really works from the bottom up. I pointed to the thing that Impact put out a few months ago about rethinking traceability that was on critical minerals, but it starts from the premise of these things have to begin from the bottom up and take time and take investment. And there is always a tension in these conversations between scale and technology and let's get it done tomorrow, and the fact that you got to work for years to figure out what are the elements and what are the indications in one community, one country, one region versus another. But that's the way over 15 years we can teach the technology to understand what are the indications in those situations. If we can teach ChatGPT to understand how I think in a matter of a few months, I think we can do a lot more in terms of over 10 years. We don't need to fix this tomorrow. You know, David's point is a good one. We don't need to not do it because we can't do it all at once. We can do a lot, and we can learn then the rest of it. And the point about cost, other people have heard me make this complaint before. This is diamond specific, but it's true across all industries. And being transparent about my methodology, with some help from ChatGPT, the Natural Diamond Council's budgets, roughly, over the last 10 years, $570 million. That's rough. That's again based on whatever information ChatGPT was bringing in, plus whatever other companies are doing. So you're hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars is spent by the diamond industry on advertising. Now that's important. I'm not a company. I don't work at a company. I'm sure marketing is important. But if half that money had been spent on technology and programs like Moyo, like Gem Fair, like others, would the conversation about what natural diamonds have to compare to lab-grown be different? If the investment had been made in 2010 or 2011 when the State Department sent a letter to the RJC saying you need a chain of custody for diamonds, instead of that being rejected and the industry going apoplectic, what if the investment had been made in traceability? Like, we would be in a different place. And it's a counterfactual. It's a counterfactual to say where would we be if we had done things differently. Of course, it is hard to imagine we could be in a possibly worse place if you're in the diamond sector than if those systems had been developed. So to say that the money isn't there and the cost isn't there, I think it's choice. It's decision making. What are your decisions around where you're investing and how you're going to connect to the consumer and the rest of the supply chain?
I would actually
I just had a very
gently disagree with Brad over there.
point on Brad.
Oh yeah, go ahead, David.
Maybe just a very brief anecdote on Brad's point of cost. Just if you take Gemfair, for example, and I'm sure there's someone from Gemfair here in the room at the conference, but the ability to use technology to get fair value for the raw materials greatly outweighs the cost of the technology. And the traceability becomes a side benefit or a side product of that process. So I think, again, you need to always balance between cost is always there. Yes, the commercial companies that need to make a living. But in the end, I believe the value that the technology creates, especially at the ASM level, where there's so much of a lack of information, there's so much of a lack of data, actually adds a huge amount, a lot more than the cost of the technology.
Yeah, I want to gently disagree with Brad's point there.
You don't have to be gentle.
And that, I mean, I know that you can see the financial results of Tracer. They've lost tons of money. They spent tons of money on that thing. I don't know if it was all well spent, but you know, it's a fact that they've lost a lot of money on that. And, you know, the NDC's budget is pretty minor at this point. So yeah, I think there has been a lot of money spent on traceability. I'm sure David has spent a lot of money on it too. And and as we were mentioning when we talked about consumers, I don't think it's a silver bullet. Again, I'm not saying that De Beers is a perfect company or, you know, that their priorities are perfect or whatever. I agree traceability is extremely important. I just don't think that, you know, if they took half the NDC budget and put it into traceability, I really don't see any
My point
substantial
wasn't
difference.
comparing numbers, it was comparing, it's numbers that are behind an objective, right? If the policy objective of the industry had been, we're gonna develop and invest in traceability and transparency and honesty across the supply chain so that all miners understand what their diamonds are selling for them at the end of the road, and which also allows us to then speak to our consumers more directly. It's not just picking out the numbers, it's picking, the decision was we're gonna focus on marketing, I think.
Yeah.
If I read your articles, right? I mean,
Correct,
the decision was to focus on marketing. That's a choice, that's a difference. And so sure, individual expenditures on traceability haven't added up in the same way they could have if the NDC's goal had been, we're gonna come together and we're gonna bring the entire sector together to solve traceability and transparency in the diamond industry, and we're going to also market that. Like, I think it's hard for me to believe you wouldn't be in a different place. Maybe the whole thing would have been worse, but I think it's at least worth kind of thinking through that point. And we still have that. The diamond industry still has the chance to make that decision now.
And well, I think they will spend something that is a mix of marketing and traceability, and we'll see how it works. I don't think anybody knows for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
And I'd like to point out that this is possible in other industries. Like, as a jewelry industry, why aren't we looking to industries that have achieved this? You see it in agriculture, you see it in lumber, right? There's other industries that are doing this, and they're doing it consistently, so it's not that it's not possible, to Brad's point. Like, it is possible, but there has to be a unification of what those requirements are, those interlinking of systems. Like, it is possible because other industries are doing it.
And they're doing it for goods that cost less.
Correct.
And on top, traceability can be one of the best marketing tools, so they could have used it as a marketing tool today, where mass marketing is not as impactful as it was 50 years ago, but we need more guerrilla marketing, much more niche marketing. Then why didn't they use it in this way? You can show the whole story, as we said. Sorry, there's a question in the...
Yeah, go. I will get to the question. I'm not saying, just for the record, that traceability is a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing, and I think it's something that is important. I just think that, you know, if you don't have proper demand for the product, which is what we've seen over the last couple of years, then you don't have anything that's worth tracing. It's just a fact. You know, it's just, this industry was built on marketing, right? It's done a lot less marketing, and it's suffered for it. And I think that you can't, you know, traceability is great, and I believe in marketing origins. I just don't think that it's a silver bullet. And we have a question over here. Thank you.
Hi, I see I've got the mic, and there's loads of people with their hands up, so I'll be brief. Just don't beat me up trying to access it. This is clearly a very invigorating conversation. I've got people around me going, I just don't agree with that. and I have to say that I'm with them. The thing at the very start of the title, by the way, I'm Estelle, for everybody that doesn't know me. The thing at the very start of the title of this session is trust. And what the conversation we've had actually just blows open the fact that the ultimate value of traceability and information sharing is to build trust within business relationships, with the regulator, with consumers. And I'm not within the diamond industry. I've been a researcher on diamonds for years, amongst other minerals. But having worked across mineral categories, I'm so sorry, but I don't agree that overinvestment in marketing is going to build trust. Because for a product that is generally known amongst consumers to have been successful on the basis of manipulation of information historically, with the fact that the internet, social media, and real-time information is out there now, that ordinary people are looking for truth. as the basis of building trust. And truth doesn't need to be pretty for people to trust something. I think trust comes from the fact that truth comes with warts on it. And what matters is, and this is what we learn from the practice of due diligence, which traceability enables, that truth, when it comes with the warts on, when you say, this is the dirty bit, and this isn't good, but this is what we're going to do to change that. And here's the progress we've made. That type of honesty is where we build trust. So I think I do really support Brad's point about the choice of where the money goes. And I think actually maybe we all have different views about what the consumer really is looking for. So the question is, who are we trying to convince? And is the money being well spent in making that convincing? And it's not really a question, it's just an intervention, and I hope that's helpful.
I think that's really important because I actually think that showing the gaps is exactly how you build trust with consumers, showing them, you know, okay, I know my product comes from X country and I buy it in Y country and I don't actually know how it gets from X to Y. And I'm researching that and I'm trying to figure that out, but I don't know, and I'm being honest about what I have the information that I have available. I also remember talking to a large jewelry retailer about how they were dealing with Dodd-Frank compliance back in the day, and they told me that they lost some of their smelters because they literally could not comply with Dodd-Frank. And there was deep regret from the company. They worked with them so closely. They tried to get them to, you know, to formalize, to have the information that they needed, and they ultimately had to make the decision to stop working with them, and they really struggled with that choice. And I think that is also important, showing where you're making the efforts to work with your smaller companies, your ASM folks, and showing, okay, we were able to work with this group of people, we're not able to work with this group of people anymore because we can't do it. And that being honest about that is really important.
All right, we have a bunch of questions, and I'm actually being told to wrap up. So I'll get you and then Amish. Okay, do you want to do Amish first? We can do Amish first.
Hi, I think it's questions more for Sarah, Jewelers Vigilance. The question is, I'm an importer of earth mined from India. Close to 37 million carats of rough that came in the system last year was Russian, which is almost a third of the diamonds, earth mined diamonds that came in the system. From a liability perspective, what you just said, which is the soft declaration, is done by the importer, not by the exporter.
Yes.
So in that scenario, if a third of the diamonds that are coming in, and that further goes up, because when you look at the percentage over half carat diamonds to under half carat, the majority is actually under half carat. So how does that liability play for the importer in future, because the soft declaration is by the importer who has no clarity on the supply chain, with 92% diamonds cut in India, where the country of origin gets changed based on the US laws. How does that work?
Good question. So,
sorry.
Nope, that's okay. This is what I do all day. So there is, when you make those statements, as an importer, you're making a statement to customs saying, I'm stating that there's, no, you know, for these diamonds half a carat and above, that they are not of Russian origin. You are absolutely relying on your suppliers to give you clear information, and you should be checking on the information that your suppliers are giving you, and that's about your relationship with your supplier. In terms of you making that statement here in the United States, there is a concept called secondary sanctions, which essentially means like if you are one step removed from that purchase decision, but your funds are going to ultimately benefit the sanctioned entity, you could be subject to secondary sanctions, and it is a liability, is what I'm saying. For the diamonds that are under half a carat, they are not banned from import into the United States. However, I will say that there are still a lot of US companies, retail businesses, who have said to their suppliers, I don't want any Russian diamonds of any size, regardless, so don't sell me them. And so that's about making sure that your work with your retailer is transparent as well.
Okay.
What's that? I don't, sorry. Mhm.
then the numbers then are not that. That everything, because if you look at all the import, 100% was compliant.
Are you saying to me that people are lying on the customs forms that they're bringing into the US? Yeah. Yeah, as an importer, you're liable. If the statements that you're making are not factual and customs comes to you and says, hey, I know you filled out this form, but I want to do some more investigation, you need to be able to back up the statements that you made.
What does your supplier tell you? What do you hear from your supplier?
Every single supplier is going to say that the goods are compliant because they themselves have no clarity of where the rock comes from.
But do they make an effort, do you think? Do you believe that they make an effort to segregate the goods?
No, I think
don't.
there are two situations. There are some that would like to make an effort, but become the washing machine because and it's not even because they want to do dirty business, it's just that they don't find other solutions. And because it costs $100, they get $100 to change an origin instead of having to pay for us. But this is where the traceability systems come in and can help them also comply. But they still can get squashed because it is a business and there is a change in the business and there are companies that will die out. And that's how it is in many businesses when there are these kind of changes and that people have the ostrich, let's say, attitude where it's not going to happen, and then, oh, suddenly it happened. And that's it. And there are some that are going to be proactive and are going to survive and some are not going to survive because they can't or they didn't have the mindset to change it or give themselves the means to do it.
I think everyone is looking at the U.S. and saying, they're not enforcing this, it's not going to matter, and it only doesn't matter until they do start, and all they have to do is pick one. You pick one example and you hold up their goods and then you start investigating, and that has a cascading effect.
But they don't offer any kind of, if you asked, would they offer any kind of documentation? No. Okay, all right.
Rob, I can tell you that most
fantastic. One more question, and then we got to finish it. Oh, David, yeah.
I would say again, I know the supply chain very, very well as we work with the entire supply chain, and I can say that most suppliers selling into the US, and I'm not talking about the big Indian manufacturers, but you've got a huge, intricate ecosystem of the supply chain. Most suppliers don't know. It's not that they are providing incorrect information or false information. They just don't know. And as Jennifer said, that's exactly where systems, whether they are manual systems implemented by certain players or technological systems, come into play in order to provide that certainty. So again, most of the pipeline just does not know and have the information available.
Well, if you deal with goods from a major supplier like De Beers or Burgundy or something like that, that information is available. So if that information isn't available, is that generally a sense that maybe there could be an issue, or?
The information is available, but you need the participants along the pipeline to participate in the process. It's not enough for the information to be available. And as you said, you gave two examples of De Beers and Burgundy, and there are others, ODC and others that are already very or fully engaged within the processes. But you also need the different players along the pipeline to be engaged. And I don't remember who said it. If you're having a large portion of the retailers who say, I don't care, that sends a message back along the pipeline to the buyer that's buying and supplying to that retailer, and the supplier that's selling to that wholesaler in New York who's selling to that retailer. So you need, in the end, to make the system work, and I believe today, as I said, at least in the diamond industry, that the capabilities are there. You just need enough of the people to say, this is important for us, whether it's due to sanctions or whether it's due to retail or brand demand, or whether it's just because it creates a really significant story for the product, whatever the reason is, to have that demand. And I agree, it's not a silver bullet. But we do see, and I will say this, we do see a significant change in the last 6 to 12 months on that regard. And it's not due to sanctions, because as Brad said, In the US, at least, it's on hold. But we do see a significant change. Maybe that is due, and this is my personal opinion, due to the fact that natural diamond retailers want to have a story and differentiate from lab grown. So therefore, I think the traceability is a very good story that can be told. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see a significant growth in terms of the demand for traceability from the retail side, especially in the US.
Okay, I'll let Brad have the last word here, and then we have to wrap up.
Sorry. I mean, maybe to try to end on 2 points I started with. This sort of ongoing, like, they don't know. The war started in March of 2022. The first time sanctions around diamonds came onto the screen was at the end of, it was April of 2022. The idea of traceability and sanctions was introduced in May of 2023. The idea that, like, these are decisions of not asking, of not requiring, whether or not it's enforced, and I agree with what Sarah said, and we talked about artisanal miners and their need for resources. Small diamond factories also need resources to be able to do this. I very much appreciate the idea and what was said about AWDC, thinking about small companies across the entire supply chain that need resources to do this. But the idea that we don't know and we can't know, that's just untrue. It's a decision about whether or not you decide to do it, and whether you decide to lie to customs, or you decide to not do the math about how many Russian diamonds are probably in the supply chain. Like, those are choices. And I think to Estelle's point, and maybe as a preview of a conversation she and I will have here tomorrow, transparency isn't about always ending up with, like, a happy story at the end. I mean, I think this point has been made a couple times. You know, you could get to the answer where, like, your material came from a place that is, like, that's complicated. Good, that's an opportunity for engagement. That's an opportunity for a story. That's what comes out of, again, Moyo and Gemfields and others. The diamond industry has a tendency to want to just talk about Botswana, and I understand why. It's a wonderful place. The point about Angola being invested in is interesting, because Angola is a wonderful place and super complicated. Botswana is also complicated. So I think we have to invest in the idea that transparency is giving us information, and then we have to be willing to then take that information, do something with it, again, between companies, but also with consumers, with regulators, et cetera, to explain why it's necessary to continue to source to benefit the people on the ground and to benefit the people across the whole supply chain. And you can't do that if you don't have information.
Yeah, and along those lines, I would actually agree at this point. I mean, I think people don't expect perfection, but they do expect honesty. And if you're dishonest, that's different than it's an imperfect world, and I think people understand that. But I think you do have to be extremely honest, especially with customs, as Sarah will tell you. So anybody have anything they want to plug here? You want to plug your, I'll plug my books. I've written three mystery novels, robbatesauthor.com, fourth coming out August 12th.
Transparency and marketing.
There you go. And all fully traceable, too.